What I have to say this morning is primarily directed toward these wonderful young people who are about to be confirmed. They confirming their faith in Jesus Christ. And doing so, they confirm that they are beginning their adult journey of becoming more mature disciples of Jesus. And as full members of Christ's holy church, they are taking on new and rigorous obligations. However, I do want the rest of you to kind of listen in on what I have to say to them this morning, because it won't harm you either. And I begin by calling you best beloved. Best beloved. It's a title that Jesus gave his disciples. Well, best beloved, one fact is very clear to me, as I know it must be very clear to you after this year's journey together. I am an old dude disciple, and you are very young disciples. You are young men and women still on the front end of the game of life, and I am, well, if not over the hill, fast approaching the over-the-hill stage. And you may not realize this now, and perhaps won't think much about it for another 3 or 4 decades hence. But one day, like all living things who are conscious of their life, you will die. And sometimes when human beings know that they are close to death, they realize they haven't always said all that they needed to say, or have done everything that they should have done. And so they find some means to demonstrate to others what they've been thinking the meaning of their life and purpose of their life might have been. And that's what's going on in this story of Jesus. He has gathered his closest family and friends together in an upper room. And he is fully aware that even after these fulsome 3 years, they still do not understand what he is about and what his teachings mean. If we were to go back just a couple of verses in this story, we would discover that Jesus and his friends and family had gathered in the upper room in the city of Jerusalem to celebrate the meal which recalled the people of Israel escaping Egypt, the land where they had been held in bondage and slavery for hundreds of years. And it was a feast in which they rejoiced in the fact that the angel of death had passed over God's people that night for one reason and one reason only. They had obeyed an odd commandment from God, which was they sprinkled and smeared blood on the doorposts of their houses. And when the angel of the Lord passed over their house, which is where Passover comes from, because the angel saw the blood of the lamb on the doorpost, death had passed over them. And so that night, there in that upper room, they were rejoicing that they had been singled out as God's best beloved, and to remind themselves again that even in the midst of a very harsh life, God was promising them a new life indeed. Just as he had promised them long ago a new life in the promised land. They were fully aware of the consequences of their sin of wrongdoing, which had been going on for generations, and in fact had caused them to be in Egypt in the first place. But they knew now they were forgiven people, and that they were to live a new life of being forgiven. New possibilities were alive for them and for their children. And all that terrible fear related to slavery and death had been swallowed up and passed over, and that's what they were celebrating. The odd thing that you will discover about your journey in faith is as the years go by and you repeat things more and more, and you do the same old things, you sometimes forget what they mean. And that's what happened to Jesus' people. So that night he decided to help them renew the meaning of that meal and the meaning of God's relationship with them. And he took off his robe and he picked up a towel and he went one by one and washed their feet. Perhaps that's not such a big deal these days, but in those days it was a very big deal. Because you see, people didn't wear shoes, they wore sandals, and streets were not clean, well swept, and they were full of animal droppings and all kinds of other things, and so these were collected on one's feet. And so the lowliest servant in your house was given the job of washing people's feet before dinner. And it hadn't been done. And Jesus took it upon himself to do that for his best beloved. The curious thing, though, was they still didn't understand what this act of love meant. So later on in that evening meal, as they're remembering what took place in Egypt, he picked up a piece of bread and he broke it. And he said the words you're going to hear in a moment and generations of Christians have heard and sometimes ignore. This bread is my body, broken for you, best beloved. And then he picked up a cup and he poured some wine into it, and he said, this cup is a new covenant, a new understanding in my blood, poured out for you, so that you'll always know you're forgiven. For you're my best beloved. And you, best beloved, as often as we eat this bread and drink of this cup, we remember that night until Jesus returns. He wanted us to know how very, very much he loves us and how much we are to love one another. Well, still they didn't understand, and so he decided, like parents sometimes, to say it clearly. When you don't get the lesson, the parents kind of sit you down and they say, okay, here's the deal, right? Imagine yourself in that room for just a moment. Beth, can I borrow you for just a second? Okay. Love one another. Okay? But how, best beloved? As I have loved you. And how had Jesus loved them? Or how has Jesus loved the world? The blind came to him, and they were made to see. The lame who could not walk, he touched and healed. The lepers that were filled with such ugly sores that no one wanted to be near them, he embraced and healed. Soldiers of the Roman Empire, most hated by his people, he had dinner with. Tax collectors, whom everybody in the world hates, Jesus loved and sat down and ate with them. And people caught in the very act of terrible sins Jesus forgave. And best beloved, that's the life you're entering into. And Jesus says, love one another like that. And it's not easy. Now I'm going to ask you just for a moment to take a good look at each other. Go ahead. Have you always liked each other? Do you always like each other? Okay. Do you see how hard it is immediately? Okay. It's true of all of us too, isn't it? But it doesn't set the commandment aside. But that's not the new part of the commandment, because you see, lots of religions have taught love one another. Certainly it was true in Judaism. Love one another is a commandment of the great Zoroaster. Love one another is a great commandment of the Buddha. Love one another is a commandment of the great Confucius. And it's found in Plato and Socrates' works. So Jesus was not commanding something that could not be done by all human beings if only we would. The new commandment was, he gave us an example of how it was to be done. Love one another, best beloved, as I have loved you. One day, shortly after this meal, in the heat and darkness of an awful, terrible day in Jerusalem, outside the city walls, Jesus hung on a cross with his arms stretched out wide as if to embrace the whole world. And to the very men who had driven terrible spikes in his hands and his feet and would lance his side, he said, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. And that is God's love. And it's yours for the end of time. That's the journey you begin today. It's not an easy one. And you'll have to grow up into it every day, as all of us have done, and still haven't perfected it, just as Peter in the story today had to learn much, much more. But it's a beginning. And so I invite you, best beloved, to start the fullness of that journey today. In the name of Jesus, who loves you beyond all measure.